responsibility is your ability to respond to life. That is your responsibility. And if your ability to respond to life is poor, meaning you're letting your circumstances control how you feel and how you think and your actions, then you're going to get poor results. That was my entire life. When life squeezes you and applies pressure, what comes out is what's inside, meaning your thoughts, your feelings, like your emotions. And if you could change the inside, it's an inside out job, then what happens on the outside, now you're responding versus reacting, right? So that was my first step. And that was the first step toward metabolic freedom.
I imagine time and time again, you came up against resistance and you made a choice. That's the word I heard. And this is the difference between someone who from the outside looks lucky and someone who, is doing the grit and knows that when hard work meets opportunity, that's luck. And I think these are the paradigms and the shifts and the knowledge that we need in those forks in the roads when we take that pause. Welcome back to the podcast, guys. Today, I am sitting down with this month's author, Ben Azadi. He is someone whose work is truly shifting the health conversation. He's a best-selling author of this month's Book Nook pick, Metabolic Freedom, and he's a leading voice in the world of fasting, functional health, and metabolic flexibility. Around here, we talk a lot about alignment, nervous system regulation, and reconnecting with your true self. And one of the things I love about Ben and his message is that it deeply aligns and resonates with all of that. This isn't about control or willpower. It's about listening and getting back to the rhythm of your body. We're going to be talking about food, fasting, metabolic flow, and how to make all these shifts without burning out and in the way that aligns best for our bodies as women. Welcome, everybody. Ben, thank you for being here with us.
Melissa, I am grateful to be with you and your crew here. You're just down the street from me. I think I could throw my bottle as far as I can. I might be able to hit your house. You're not too far. I won't do that, but I think I could probably land in your front yard or something. But good to be here with you.
Yeah, it's always good to be with you. It's so fun to be a bike ride away, literally from one another. And you had just said like we're in the rainy season here, so it's a perfect day for podcasting and just gathering and picking your brain on all the questions.
Perfect day. We're gonna have some fun. Let's go.
Yes. So we just read Metabolic Freedom in this community. And, I think what would be really cool with the general conversation is you and I both have like a love and trust of the body and the nervous system and this paradigm that our body heals itself. Right, which I think is a really powerful, there's like a quote, I think it's by Einstein, and it's the most important decision you can make is whether or not the universe is good or bad, because that's really the lens through which you see everything and you make all your decisions. And I think you and I, as far as our take on the human body, it's like the same question can be applied. The most important thing you can ask yourself is my body designed for health and health freedom, or is my body designed to fail? And we have that common thread, and we believe it's designed to thrive. And so in my mind, this is really a conversation about aligning with our body, our brain. I always love, as you know, the nervous system lens on this and mindset and how those things apply to our metabolic freedom.
Oh yeah, that's well said. The premise that we have is it's a kind of a story, right? We're creating the story. We believe that the body was built to be self-healing, and we could have a different story, which is we're flawed. We need a medication. We need X, Y, Z. But in reality, it's faith versus fear is what we're talking about here. And the interesting thing about both faith versus fear is that it both demands for you to, they both demand for you to believe in something you cannot see. Well, why don't you just choose the positive route, which of course is the faith that we have this amazing human body with this innate intelligence that's designed to heal itself. And all roads for sure lead to the nervous system, which are all about that. When our nervous system is dysregulated, I know that's part of your backstory, burnt out, doing all the things. When our nervous system is like that, when it's out of balance, too much sympathetic, not enough parasympathetic, it's going to present to us symptoms. The body will present symptoms to us, and those symptoms can be really subtle in the beginning. Maybe it's, around 3 or 4 p.m. I start to feel a little tired. I just sit on the couch and, this is something that wasn't happening before, but pretty much now every 3 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon, you feel a little fatigued, right? So a subtle little sign that something is dysregulated. And then maybe that turns into brain fog in a month or so, where you just have a hard time now sitting down and reading a book. You just have a hard time focusing, remembering people's names. Maybe you walk into the kitchen and you just, why did I walk in here, right? So then it's another subtle sign of like brain fog. And if we don't pay attention to these symptoms, the body's check engine light, these subtle symptoms turn to a major diagnosis. And then we have a serious problem, right? The symptoms are not bad. The symptoms are not something we should look at and hate and try to mask or medicate. The are something we should be thankful for because it gives us an opportunity to do an audit on what's happening in our lifestyle that's throwing the nervous system out of balance. And we'll talk about some of those things, but I just want to start there with yes, our premise is that when you remove what's dysregulated that nervous system, the body will heal. The symptoms will go away by default because we're not chasing the symptom. We're just putting the body back into homeostasis.
I love that. Yeah. And, your book is all about, fasting and metabolic flexibility and ketones and carbs and cortisol. And I think these are like really important buzzwords right now. And I think it can be really overwhelming and it can be really simplified. But what I love that we're going to do here is what I'm hearing and what you just said. We're kind of going to take a zoomed out approach. And we're going to focus on the big picture because when we can make decisions from that place, we don't have to be as technical. Like, okay, now I'm stepping into this lifestyle of ketosis and eating better and doing all the right things without like having to just stress about all the logistics and all the details. And this is a conversation to me about listening to our body because our body keeps the score. This is a conversation about our beliefs because actions follow beliefs. And if we can nail the belief system, then the actions just kind of follow through. It's not something we have to worry about so much. So, what I would love to start with in this is kind of where you came from, leading into where you are now. The book you wrote obviously is called Metabolic Freedom. And I love that word. And I kind of want to know, like, why that word? And in the past, with how you used to live, which I'm familiar with, but maybe we could cue the audience up to this. What did metabolic freedom or even freedom, what did freedom feel like to you then versus now? And community book nookers, as you're listening at any point, you can put your questions in the chat. We'll either bring them up in the general podcast here, or we'll make sure that we save them for the Q&A after.
Freedom is, I think we all desire freedom in our lives, whether it's, metabolic freedom, which is health freedom, or financial freedom, relationship freedom, time freedom. It's a very appealing like word. And for me, it means a lot of things, all those things I just mentioned. But my last name, Azadi, literally translates into freedom in Farsi. My parents are Iranian. I'm first generation American. So in Farsi is their language, and the word Azadi literally means freedom. So it has that special meaning. But I didn't have metabolic freedom when I was growing up. I mean, a lot of people unfortunately don't have metabolic freedom. About 93% of people don't have metabolic freedom. And it's because of many reasons. A lot of what we've been taught about health and nutrition, it's usually the opposite. It is true. For me, I followed a standard American diet. I followed conventional guidelines. I ate processed foods, low fat foods. I mean, all the things I thought I was doing to be healthy was actually creating a metabolic prison, not metabolic freedom. So I had a lot of symptoms. I was very unhealthy. I was so unhealthy that it turned into obesity, both physically and mental obesity. It turned into suicidal thoughts and depression and mental illness and addictions. And this is, me in my teenage years, early adulthood. 2007, I was 23 years old. I was ready to give up on life and exploring ways to do so. And I just kept thinking about my mom. And I kept thinking about, if I took my life, what would that do to my mom? It would devastate her. And I didn't want to do that to her. So it stopped me. And I didn't have any freedom back then because my body was in pain. My thoughts were toxic. I was in this vicious cycle of just giving myself poor Franken foods, addictions to video games and drugs. So I had no freedom pretty much with my health until I took the first step, which is I took responsibility. I started to read Dr. Wayne Dyer's work, and he was the first person that changed my life. Of course, Hay House author, right? Melissa, like us, he would say things like, he would talk about the word responsibility. And I was 23 years old, and I've heard the word before, but I never really understood it until I heard him describe it. And he would say, responsibility is your ability to respond to life. That is your responsibility. And if your ability to respond to life is poor, meaning you're letting your circumstances control how you feel and how you think and your actions, then you're going to get poor results. That was my entire life. But if you change the way you respond to things, instead of reacting to things, now you're responding to things, then you change your ability to respond, you change your results. So that eliminates all of the stinking thinking, the victim mindset, all the things that were holding me back, my slow metabolism, enabling family members, bad genetics, all the things that I was making up as the reason why I'm not healthy and happy. And then he would describe, life as an orange, and he would say, what happens when you squeeze an orange and what comes out? Simple question, and the answer is orange juice. Then he would say, why do you think that is? And that's because that's what's inside the orange juice. So that he would apply that sort of analogy to life. When life squeezes you and applies pressure, what comes out is what's inside, meaning your thoughts, your feelings, like your emotions. And if you could change the inside, it's an inside out job. Then what happens on the outside? Now you're responding versus reacting, right? So it was these little subtle things I started to learn from Dr. Wayne Dyer. It didn't start with a nutrition change for me. I was not changing anything about nutrition and fitness. It was just studying Bob Proctor and Wayne Dyer. I was just understanding that my attitude is everything, and your attitude determines your altitude. I used to hear him say that as well. And then one more thing here. Bob Proctor said back then, you are the only problem you will ever have, and you are also the only solution. And when I heard him say that, I thought, that doesn't even make any sense. Like, what is this guy talking about? And then I just kept hearing him say it, and I kept thinking about it. And then I thought, well, that is actually the most accurate statement I've ever heard in my life. Like, I am my only problem. Bad news. Good news, I'm also the only solution. That goes for every human being, which goes to taking responsibility. So that was my first step. And that was the first step toward metabolic freedom. Then I started doing the fundamentals, right? It wasn't complicated, like you mentioned earlier, with doing keto and fasting. It was none of that. It was just moving my body, eating real food, getting sleep, stop drinking alcohol, stop eating processed crap. And I lost 80 pounds in 9 months. I went from being obese to fit. And that was 17 years ago. And that's what got me into the health space.
Amazing. So much good stuff there. I want to ask, like, how big of a piece does that, everything you just described, how big of a piece does that play in the success of anything in your life? And who I'm thinking of as I ask this question is any of these women here in this room or listening later on that are going for something new, whether it's a new habit, a new routine, a new career, something daring, something scary, something simple in their day that's just new and different than they've done before, carving a new path. Like, how much does this part play a role? And then what do you do when you come against resistance, when it's new, scary, different?
Yeah, it's really, really important question. And I think that if we're not doing the things you just mentioned, if we're not embracing the challenges, if we're not taking ourselves out of our comfort zone, if we're not chasing these goals, then I believe we're doing what God put us on planet Earth here a big disservice. I think we're designed to go for the things we love, we want to do, and strive for those things which are unique to all of us. But when you take responsibility, it manifests into every area of your life, not just the health. It's what you're talking about here, because when you face the challenge, the setback, whatever you want to call it, you figure it out. You stop blaming whatever the circumstance was, and you are now responding versus reacting. So that mindset translates to every area in your life, your relationships, your work, the goals you're pursuing. And let's face it, we're all going to experience that. We're all going to experience the setback, especially if you're stretching and growing, which is great because we should be doing that. There's going to be those challenges. But what I learned is that failure, the word failure, we might experience like that we're failing, but there's a difference between experiencing that we are failing at something versus being a failure. Nobody's a failure as a human being. There's no such thing as a human that's a failure. We might experience failure when we go for something and we don't achieve it, but the failure is really feedback, right? So the story that we create, if we could look at the failure as feedback, then we can learn from it. Then we never failed. We just learned something, and then we work on something different. And the responsibility of that is everything. And the responsibility piece works in every area of our life. I'll give you a simple example here. Melissa, we live in this area called Miami Shores, for those listening, and it's a beautiful little suburb community here in Miami. And there's a lot of like four-way stop signs. There's one right here on 96th Street. And a few months ago, I was driving with my fiance, Natasha, and I was at the four-way stop sign. And you know how it works. The person who gets there first and stops is the person who could go first. That's not always followed in Miami, but this time I got there first, maybe like 3 seconds first, and then I hit the gas to keep going. But the other person kind of was speeding, and he kind of cut me off. And in that moment right there's like a space, right? I could have gotten triggered. I could have honked my horn. It could have ruined my day. Maybe I would have gotten an argument with Natasha because it put me in a bad mood. But that's not how I live my life, right? But it started with me understanding responsibility. So I created a story that, man, that person must be in a rush to get somewhere. They might be rushing somewhere where there's a serious situation, right? I created a story that impacted a better future for myself. It didn't take me out of the present moment, right? So something as simple as that you could apply to the bigger setbacks in life when you create a better story. And now the failure is feedback, and you just keep going forward.
I love that. And ladies, I would love to know in the chat because to me this is kind of the most important meat of a conversation like this. Because this is the human experience and this is, in our most negative places, which are usually going to come up anytime we're doing something new. So this is very much a conversation around the book and doing keto and doing fasting. And we will go into all the technicalities of that, all your guys' questions on the specifics of the 30-day walkthrough. But like ultimately, this is what I love to talk about because we can sit here and be like, here's how it's going to look in black and white, and here's what you're going to do, and it's going to work out. And then we're all going to go our separate ways. We're going to try these things, and we're going to feel like a failure because we hit resistance, because we have human emotions and human experiences, and it doesn't go black and white. Life is not that way. And so, my goal in this community is like, let's walk through that stuff. The other thing is easy. And Ben, I know I love you for this. Like you show up this way and it could be very easy to look at you and be like, well, this is easy for you. This is your life. This is blah, blah, blah. Like I just watched you have one of the most challenging years. Good challenge. But I would love to kind of talk that through. Like you had a really big stretch year, a book launch, the way that you did it to hit your goal of New York Times bestseller. Again, these are all really good stressors. But like I imagine time and time again, you came up against resistance and you made a choice. That's the word I heard. And this is the difference between someone who from the outside looks lucky and someone who, is doing the grit and knows that when hard work meets opportunity, that's luck. And I think these are the paradigms and the shifts and the knowledge that we need in those forks in the roads when we take that pause.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I agree with you.
So, what were some of the biggest challenges for you in this last year? And what were the moments where maybe you even struggled to get to that place?
It has been quite the year, as you know, Melissa. There's been a lot of challenges and a lot of growth, and it's been wonderful, and I'm very grateful for it all. The nervous system conversation we were talking about earlier, my nervous system took a big hit. Add all these stressors and appointments and interviews and travel, and I could deal with it because I am healthy, thank God for that. But it was a lot for my nervous system to adapt to, and I know we spoke about the symptoms are subtle, pay attention to it, but even knowing that doesn't mean all of us do it. All right. So I myself included, I'm not perfect. So I noticed like 5, 6 months ago, as I started to embark on this journey of stretching for the book promotion, when I look at my Aura Ring stats, my resting heart rate is a little bit higher than usual. It's usually like in the lower 40s, 42, 43, which is a really good resting heart rate for me. And started noticing my average is now 46, 47, sometimes 51, a sign that my body is going through some stress. I started noticing my heart rate variability was actually declining below the average. Usually I'm around 60, 70. It was starting to go 40, 45, 50, another sign that there was a lot of stress. But the mindset was, this is just a few months. I want to hit the goals. Let's figure it out. And I kind of ignored those subtle signs and symptoms. And I felt fine, but I could kind of see with the metrics that my body was under some strain. And then it manifested, the body was going to have you pay attention eventually, right? It manifested, and I don't think you know this. I don't know if I shared this with you, Melissa. Maybe I did. But a couple months ago, or about a month and a half ago, a couple weeks before the book launch, I did a 3-day fat loss challenge where I wanted to promote the book to virtually on a 3-day fat loss challenge. We had 14,000 people signed up for it. It was a 3-day event, free, with a 2-hour live stream every day, hosted by me. And I spent all weekend. Starting on a Monday. I spent all weekend preparing my slides, going over the structure. It was a really stressful weekend putting this all together. And I was going over the presentation slides about 10 minutes before I was going to hit record it was a Zoom webinar like this. And I was going over with my team member, Alina. Here was what I'm going to cover here. And what I noticed the day before when I woke up, I started getting these palpitations over the upper right side of my chest. It was kind of come and go. Another sign that the nervous system is speaking to you. And then it went away for the rest of the day. But then when I woke up Monday morning, it was back, and another sign of stress. But I was like, I got to get through these 3 days. But 10 minutes before I was going to hit live, I see all these people waiting on the webinar. I start to have shortness of breath, and I start to explain to Alina as I'm going over the slides, like something's going on with me, and I'm not sure I could go live for 2 hours and present. I think you're going to need to do the presentation for me. I think I got to go to urgent care to figure out what's going on. And I like left and went outside, got some sun, came back in, and I still having the palpitations and shortness of breath. So I said, Alina, you got to take over. And she did. And I went to urgent care, and thank God, everything was fine. EKG. It was my body under so much stress. It was my nervous system saying, if you're not going to pay attention to me, I will
Mhm.
force you to pay attention. And since that happened, I haven't had any of that happen again. No shortness of breath, no palpitations, because I changed the way I was living my life, because I learned the lesson. Now I have breaks in between appointments. Now I have times where I just sit outside of my backyard. I do these little resets. I do all the things I learned from Melissa. And by doing that, I'm noticing that my heart rate variability is increasing now and my resting heart rate is decreasing, right? Because I paid attention to the signs. So yeah, it's been challenging. It was all great, but even my body, which I thought I could handle it, had some things going on, and now they were opportunities for me to get feedback and learn from it.
You're getting in alpha. You're spending more time in
Right.
alpha getting out there playing basketball.
That's right. More alpha.
The
Exactly.
pulses, the pulses between. Yeah, I
Yes.
mean, I imagine you learned a lot last year. And these are the thing, I think we all have like our stressful seasons, our stressful lives. So I love this is part of what I think is so cool bringing in the authors. It's like, and in the chat, if you guys agree, like I would love to hear. It's one thing to read someone's book, and I think we feel like we get to know them, but then to actually get to sit down with the author and like feel your heart and really, really get to know you. I think it just takes the knowledge from the book to another level.
Yeah. I think it's
So
cool.
thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I didn't know
Yeah.
that. Do you think that's like what some people would call a panic attack? You think
Yeah.
that's what it
Yeah.
was?
Natasha, my fiance, called it a panic attack. I guess it was. I've never had it before, so I didn't know what a panic attack felt like. I've only seen people have it. So yeah, I guess it was kind of like a panic attack.
Hmm. Do you, pivoting a little into like the technicalities of fasting and things, I think in the fasting conversation for a lot of women, at least perimenopausal women, we're like way more sensitive to those kinds of stressful fluctuations, like cortisol, our hormone shifts. I've definitely noticed it. I just turned 44 and like I've never been someone who has felt anxious, but there are times through the month now I'm like, whoa, that's getting way more familiar.
Mm.
And I've noticed there's like tweaks I need to make in the way that I fast. So I'm curious with all the women that you've coached through, which I think is in the thousands,
Yeah.
what have you learned about the way that women, let's start with fasting, need to do this a little bit differently than the men or the women, especially in like perimenopause, because that's a lot of my audience.
Yeah, and for me too, like the majority of my students in my programs are women in perimenopause as well. Like 65% of all of my students are in that category. So I get it. I'm not there myself personally, but I've worked with a lot. Yeah, fasting needs to be customized. Fasting is there's an art to it. Of course, there's a science. There's also an art. And I know you've covered Mindy's book, Fast Like a Girl. She's so good at teaching it. You're also brilliant at teaching it, Melissa. And with women, your hormones, of course, are very different than men in terms of the fluctuations. I like the way that Dr. Stephanie Estima put it. She would compare men's hormones to the sun, a 24-hour pattern of renewal, and cycling women's hormones to the moon, 28-day pattern. And of course, as you go through perimenopause and then postmenopause, there are significant changes as well. And cortisol is a big piece there, and the adrenal glands are a big piece there. And we know fasting is incredible. It's one of my favorite tools to harness the innate intelligence. It's absolutely so powerful. And I compare fasting to a chainsaw. A chainsaw is also powerful. That could get you amazing results if you've read the user manual and you wield that chainsaw properly. But if you just skip the user manual and just start using the chainsaw, you could hurt yourself. Similar with fasting. And there's a user manual for women and a user manual for women in different stages of their life. And I like looking at heart rate variability as a great gauge to see if the stressors of fasting, if you're adapting to the stressors of fasting, or if it's too much for you to adapt to. So HRV is a game changer for everyone to track, but especially perimenopausal women, because heart rate variability is looking at the nervous system as a whole. It's looking at how well your nervous system is adapting to stressors, fasting included. And everybody's nervous system, heart rate variability, excuse me, is different. So you want to find your average. And I use an Aura ring to track mine. There's also Whoop Band, Apple Watches, Fitbits. There's different devices. So you want to track your heart rate variability, let's say for 7 days. And then you want to get the average of the 7 days. And everybody's average is different, so don't compare it to your husband. But let's say it's 45. That's your average. And now you start applying different fasting. Maybe you do a 24-hour fast or an 18-hour fast. And then you pay attention to your heart rate variability the day of the fast. If you notice that the more you fast, the lower your heart rate variability drops, that's a clear sign that fasting is too much of a stressor for your body. If you notice your HRV stay at average or even increase, your body adapted to the fasting really well. Keep doing that sort of schedule, right? So that's a good gauge. I would also recommend just paying attention to how your body feels. It could be a little tricky because we tend to feel good during a fast, even if it could be stressful. But what I mean by that is like pay attention the next day, overnight. Did it impact your sleep? Did you get good sleep on a fast? The prior day was a fasting day. These are things you should pay attention to. Of course, we know that women who have a menstrual cycle, the week of their bleed, the menstrual cycle week, is probably the best week to practice more fasting, do more ketosis, do more stressors and biohacking. You're a little bit more resilient and your hormones are low, fasting is high, right? But the week before the bleed week is the week where hormones need to be high, so fasting and stressors are low. These are a couple of nuances here. Oxytocin, though, is the name of the game, right? If we have high levels of cortisol and stress and we're not adapting to different stressors like fasting very well, then the name of the game is, like Melissa likes to say, to play, to find ways to raise oxytocin, playing and doing your favorite hobby, doing things you enjoy. For me, it's basketball, right? Finding things you enjoy doing and playing are great ways to raise oxytocin. Watching funny movies, petting your dog, your partner, not petting your partner, but being with your partner.
You can pet your partner.
You can pet your partner. Of course, gratitude is incredible for oxytocin. So if you find that you want to fast, but your body's not adapting to it, then you want to counter the stressor of fasting by finding ways to raise oxytocin.
Love that. Yeah, we're currently in the midst of a 30-day play challenge. Play
Ah, that's
portal, I
cool.
like to call it, or play journey, because I don't
That's
want it to be a
cool.
challenge. This is about less
Right.
challenges.
I like
Uh,
play portal. That's a cool term. Yeah.
Play portal, right?
Yeah.
Play is the portal to connection and balance and everything.
I like that.
All right, so where do you sit on like the fasting in the morning versus the evening as far as
Hmm.
HRV cortisol? Because I think
Yeah.
it used to be everything we used to hear was intermittent fasting and
Hmm.
don't eat in the morning. And I feel like that's changing now.
Yes. Yeah. Good point. I'm glad you brought that up because I forgot to mention that for both men and women, but especially women, the research is showing, and I also see this with data from my students, that having breakfast and lunch and skipping dinner is much better for men and women, but especially women. And it's the challenge with it is that it's more difficult for our schedule to do that, and socially, and especially when we eat dinner with our family. But if we had the option, and we all have the option, but if we wanted to do it, then that would be the better option. There was a study that I was talking to you about, I think offline, Melissa, Dr. Courtney Peterson from the University of Alabama, Birmingham. She did a really interesting study looking at intermittent fasters and two different groups, and everything was controlled in a lab. The two groups ate the same food, the same calories. The only thing that was different about the two groups is that one group, let's call them group one, they had breakfast and lunch and they skipped dinner. So they ate between 8 a.m. and 2 p.m. That was their eating window. And they fasted outside of that. Group number two, same calories, same food. Only difference is that they skipped breakfast and had lunch and dinner. They ate between 2 p.m. and 8 p.m. Then they measured their, of course, insulin levels, blood sugar levels, but they also measured autophagy, which is, we can't measure it, but they could do it in a lab via a protein called the LC3A protein, which autophagy is the cellular cleanup process. It's really important in spurts. They measured autophagy and they measured the sirtuin genes, like the SIRT1 genes, which are longevity genes. And they noticed that after just 4 days, the group that had breakfast and lunch and skipped dinner had 22% more autophagy and 11% more of their sirtuin genes activated, right? So the research shows it. But even outside of the research, we know that cortisol and insulin, we're more insulin sensitive in the morning versus later in the day. We also know that we just feel better. I see this anecdotally for men and women. We feel better when we have most of our calories during the day versus late at night. Our ancestors lived this way for a very long time. They really didn't eat when the sun set. They ate most of their calories during the day. So I think it's really important for men and women, but especially for women, if you can, make the decision to have breakfast and lunch on some days, or if not all days, and have your just have your calories earlier in the day. That's going to make a big difference for you.
Yeah, I love that. Jason, he is a horrible sleeper with everything that we've implemented. And there's like a few things that move the needle for him. HBOT definitely helps. When he skips dinner, he sleeps like a rock.
Mhm.
Like just that change. It's massive. And I think, yeah, it is a challenge socially, but even if we rotate that in, it's super powerful. I do think we're going to hear and see more about like the circadian eating window. Some of our friends are talking about that a lot, Danny Hamilton and
Yes.
I think Molly Eastman.
Hmm.
But, I love how at the beginning you talked about you just, started really simple, like eating more whole foods and dropping inflammatory foods. Like, what if we just focused on eating when it's light out? Like, that makes a
Simple.
huge impact.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great, good first step. You can only eat when the sun's out, right?
Yeah.
In the summer, a lot easier because longer days. Winter, a little bit
And the
more
dinner,
challenging.
shut it down at 4. Started at 10,
Yeah,
shut it down at 4, depending
that's
on where you
my
live.
style. That's my style for sure. I like
It
that.
works.
Yeah.
I want to touch on why cortisol is such an important part of this conversation as it relates to blood sugar and ketones. So for
Yep.
someone, working on getting into ketosis, they may or may not know how much cortisol can negate their progress.
Yeah, and cortisol is a kind of a bully hormone, like insulin. And cortisol, of course, is not a bad, there's no bad hormones unless it's only bad when we activate these hormones chronically, and then it could cause some issues and symptoms. But we've all heard of the cortisol belly before. It's a term that's being used, and it's true. And there's actually, it turns out there are twice the amount, get this, twice the amount of receptor sites for cortisol in our visceral fat versus our subcutaneous body fat. And the visceral fat is the fat around our organs, the liver, the kidneys, the heart, the pancreas that applies pressure and dramatically increases your risk of metabolic diseases. It's the bad fat. The subcutaneous fat is the fat around your body that's not harmful. It's the visceral white fat that's harmful. And there are 2 times more receptor sites for cortisol there in the bad fat versus the healthy fat. And that shows you how destructive cortisol can be when it's chronically elevated. And to the keto part here, ketones, when you have high levels of cortisol, glucose follows cortisol, so it'll increase your blood sugar levels, even if you're not eating, even if you're fasting. And when glucose goes up, ketones drop. So it could prevent you from getting into ketosis, or it could kick you fully out of ketosis because of the cortisol piece. Again, oxytocin is the antidote to cortisol, to high cortisol. So
Mhm.
anything you can do to raise oxytocin, laughter, singing, playing, entering that play portal, doing the 30-day play portal challenge, or not challenge, but whatever it's called, um, and gratitude. These are going to be ways to lower cortisol levels. And cortisol is it's called the silent killer because you don't really see it. It's really sneaky. And but when it's chronically elevated over time, it will lead to inflammation, visceral fat, weight gain, and for sure can kick you out of ketosis or even prevent you from entering ketosis.
That's great. This is where, I think, and I wonder if you've seen this in your communities you coach, like this is where CGM can be really cool, the continuous glucose monitor, because you can start to see like, whoa, I didn't even eat anything, but I just had a not so fun interaction with so and so, and you can see it in real time. Like that literally will impact our metabolism.
Yeah, a continuous glucose monitor, great idea. You would see if you get into if you're wearing a continuous glucose monitor and you get into a verbal argument with somebody, you will see it spike up, right? That adrenaline, that cortisol. If you watch the news, if you ever do that, hopefully you don't, but you'll see your cortisol levels increase because it's all gloom and doom and fear mongering. So yeah, and you didn't eat anything, but your cortisol levels go up, and then your glucose goes up, and your continuous glucose monitor will show that each time.
It's huge. And I'm going to keep, I mean, cortisol, cortisol, cortisol. I'm going to keep talking about it because this is really important. And this is in my mind where we make things really simple, right? We can focus on like the ketone numbers and the glucose numbers and peeing on the sticks and pricking our blood and blah 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 blah. But if we just know life is stressful, right? There's a lot. And instead of giving us a lot more downstream things to manage and measure and look at, let's just start at the top. Let's start at the root cause. And so cortisol, we all now know, if you didn't already, the impact that that can have on your success with ketones, metabolism, the cortisol in your fat. What are some other things in our environment? I see you wearing your blockers. What are some other things in our environment that might be potentially spiking our cortisol that we have control of, that we can start to balance and minimize?
Yeah, I mean, you brought up the glasses for sure. It's the artificial light that's all around us. And if you're anything like me, you're probably around artificial lights most of the day. It's all the light bulbs, the TV screens, the phone screens, the computer screens. And of course, I have these big lights here and they serve their purpose, of course. But these artificial lights, they could create a cortisol response, especially when you're getting the artificial light at nighttime. That is the time where you want to avoid it or limit it as much as possible. We want more red lights at night. So during the day, simple option, if you're going to be around artificial lights because it's part of your job, like me, then you could wear something like this. These are blue light blocking glasses where it filters out the artificial light so my brain and body doesn't have to filter out, which helps with cortisol. Also, just going outside and getting a couple of resets here and there, right? Just getting some sunshine through your eyes, great way to kind of buffer cortisol, boost dopamine levels, oxytocin levels. It doesn't mean you're outside all day long, but going outside for 5 minutes, 10 minutes every hour or so could make a huge difference, just resetting your circadian rhythm. Some other hidden things that cause cortisol spikes and stressors. Well, when you're not doing things you enjoy in life, meaning if you hate your job, if you hate the relationships you're in, if you're just kind of going through the motions, I mean, that is probably the worst thing we can do for our stress and our longevity. So much so that it's probably the leading cause toward heart disease, I would argue. There was a book called, I reference actually in Metabolic Freedom, there was a book called Recovering the Soul from Larry Dossey, a medical doctor from the late 1980s. And in the book, the study, and I know it was an older book, but the study is even more accurate to this day. The study showed that they could predict when Americans had their first heart attack in the United States, about 85% of the time, it happened Monday morning between 8 and 9 a.m. 85% of the American public had their first heart attack. And what's the significance between Monday morning, 8 and 9, and 8 to 9 a.m. in the morning? Well, going to jobs they hate, living a career that they despise. It's the stress that caused the heart attack, right? So when we do things we enjoy, the play conversation, and we love what we do, automatically we start producing dopamine, GABA, oxytocin, all these amazing chemicals which buffers the oxytocin. So maybe you can't leave your job right now. I get it, but you could find ways to play. You could find ways to do things you enjoy doing, and you could cut people out of your life who are toxic. You really can, or spend less time with them. And all of that goes a long way with cortisol, with stress, with blood sugar, with ketosis, with all the things we're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally, if you think about it, it's literally heartbreak,
That's
right? Like
exactly what it
heart
is.
health,
Yeah.
it's heartbreak. You hate your job, you hate your relationship, like that breaks your heart. Like, what are you even here doing? And I think that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so, rather than focusing on all of it, like trusting, taking that brave first step and just focusing on making your heart happy again. And then knowing that once you get there, the next step will be easier. Then you can start to cut out the people in your life that are maybe toxic. But like getting yourself stronger by filling your heart first, like looking at that one thing, just like cortisol, like let's look at the root cause and just address that. Let's not worry about the whole thing. How am I going to leave my job? My relationship sucks. No, like fill your heart. Step one. And when you're good, the rest will happen.
I love it.
I like easy. I like fun. I think we all need more of it.
We do. Yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated to your point. It's like start
Yeah.
right there and then get some momentum and then move on to the next thing.
Yes. Okay, so speaking of momentum, we've got some brave women that are working on pushing their fasts a little bit. So this is a two-parter. I'll ask you the second part again, because in case you forget. But one is, so someone in particular in the group was like wanting to hit a 24-hour fast, and that's always been like the flex for her. I think 17, 18 is where she usually goes. So the first question would be like, what's the difference between listening, because this is a lot about listening to our bodies and knowing when to stop, and listening to our bodies and knowing when to push. And then the second question, which I'll ask you again after the first one, is like any tips for bridging that gap, right? Of like, I've never been able to do 3 day, 5 day, 24 hours, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So, first one, what's the difference between listening to our body and keying in, being like, it's time to no longer, or it's okay, this is just a new edge that I've never broken through?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. Both of them are. I would say, when we fast, some of the things that are going to happen, hunger, maybe boredom, because we're so used to food is like an activity for us, and those are things that hunger is normal. It's just a hormone, and that's not something that your body's telling you must eat something to break the fast. So hunger is completely normal. Now, hunger is different than cravings. Like if you're having intense cravings during that fast, if your energy levels are just dragging on, if you're not able to focus, maybe you're feeling a little lightheaded, like those are cues. Hey, maybe you're pushing yourself too much. Let's break the fast and let's try again next time, right? It doesn't mean you failed. You got the benefits. There's no such thing as a failed fast. You got the benefits of that window. So those are a couple of things. And then, if you decide to push yourself through that, then you would pay attention to your sleep that night, your HRV, what happened there. And then that could give you a clue. Should you do that again or should you not do that again? So there's a couple of things there. There are a couple of nuances there. I'm more of the person with my personality that I tend to push through things like that. Back to the story about the panic attack or whatever I had. And then I learned the lesson and then I course correct. But I think it's better to do it before you learn that lesson and make that correction. Now, if you wanted to get really into the nitty gritty here and really see if the fast is working for you or against you, then you could test your blood glucose and blood ketones during the fast. And if you see your glucose gradually dropping and your ketones rising during the fast, that's the trend we want to see. If you don't see that happening, if your glucose levels are staying high or increasing and your ketones are dropping or non-existent, kind of a sign your body's not adapting to that stressor. So if you wanted to kind of test, that would be a metric there. And then there was a two-part, but before I get to the two-part, anything you wanted to clarify with that answer there?
No, I think testing is really good when you're new to this. I would agree with you because it gives you that confidence. Like, this is
Yes,
hunger. I'm not going to faint. I'm not going to pass out. Like, my body knows what it's doing. Ketones are raising. I can handle low blood sugar when I have ketones.
that's
I think
right.
it's crucial. I never measure anymore, but when we were all doing this at Dr. Pompa's,
Yes.
so you guys, this is kind of funny. Ben and I met through a coaching group, and we would go to these conferences. And Dr. Pompa, who was speaking at these events, was all about, he was one of the first guys really talking about
Yeah.
ketones and fasting.
Yeah.
And we would literally sit in these events and he would tell us to fast. He would encourage us to fast. He wasn't like making us do anything. And then every break, we would get to go out and these people would test our blood. And then we come back in and he's like, okay, what's going on in your body? Let me teach you. Let me guide you. And this is how, all those common questions like, does coffee throw me out of a fast? Some of us would have coffee, black coffee. Some of us would throw cream in there and MCTs. And you would literally get the data, which
Yeah.
was so powerful because then you know.
Yeah. Yeah. That was so cool. I remember those times. Yeah. He was one of the original people who were using the keto mojo, testing people. Then, it's so different for everybody. For one person, black coffee raises their glucose, breaks their fast. The other person, they don't see that. So it helps you customize the approach. And if you don't test, you kind of are guessing. I know some people are opposed to testing and pricking their finger, and you don't have to do all of that. It's optional, but it's a good option. If you could do it, great. Like you, Melissa, I don't do it anymore because you kind of get a feel for things. But in the beginning, I do see it as a valuable tool.
Yeah, it's huge. Before you answer the second one, I just also, in terms of listening to my body, like for me, I love coffee in the morning. I know a lot of people are saying don't have it till you eat breakfast. I agree. That's great for me right now. I'm just not listening. This is what I like. But I noticed a huge difference in like I put butter and heavy cream in my coffee and it's like a leveled out. I don't feel those spikes.
Mm,
So, I would translate that into knowing what I know with measuring, like my blood sugar tends to stabilize. What I'm saying is you can cue in and listen to your body and almost get similar statistics to what you would get on blood.
yeah.
And the way that you would do that, and I would love to hear your take on this, Ben, as the expert, obviously. But like if I just have black coffee, I feel that peak, like, whoa, this is fun. And then I feel that crash and jitters and maybe anxiety or snappiness. If I put butter, I tend to like butter better than the MCTs and like some heavy cream. I'm like, my brain feels clear. I feel ready for the day. I'm super calm in the morning. I'm good to go. And that is exactly what was reflected on my ketosis meters.
Mm. I'm the same way. I love that. I'm the same exact way. If I have black coffee, I'll get that little surge of energy and then kind of a crash and jitters. But if I put heavy cream, which I typically do, or even butter, I feel the same way. I feel happy. I have sustainable energy levels and I feel really good. And that also correlates to what I saw with the Keto Mojo. So very similar
Yes.
results. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder if people who can't have cream on the fast, people who it wouldn't boost their ketones, I wonder if they wouldn't feel better. You get what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
how smart is our body and how much can we just lean into that listening without the measuring? It's interesting. We'll have to poll some of our friends because now I'm really curious.
Yeah. It's a great question.
Or people in the community, if you start blood pricking and you notice that, like, I want to know. I want to know both versions. How'd you
Yeah.
feel? And then what showed up in the blood?
Yeah. Give us the feedback. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool. It'll be pretty cool to see that.
Yeah. Okay, second parter,
How do
which I
you
already
send,
forgot. What was the
like, yeah,
second?
no, how do you send the fast, right? How do you push,
Okay.
how do you go from like 2 day, 3 day fast? Well, fasting is a muscle, right? And I wouldn't recommend if you've never completed a 24-hour fast, I wouldn't recommend jumping into a 3 day fast. I would build up to it, right? And I love using a low carb keto approach before I do any fasting to get more fat adapted. So for me, that would be a tool that I would recommend and use to get more fat adapted keto first for a couple weeks before you start practicing these longer fasts. But if you're familiar, if you've already done 24 hours, then and you've done it and you felt good and you've adapted to it well, then going into like a 32-hour fast or a 36-hour fast, great. Go for it. And if you go for a 36-hour fast and you break it at the 30-hour mark, did you fail? No, you got benefits and then you could try again, right? I've done a 5 day fast. I think, Melissa, you've done a 5 day fast, correct? Right? Yeah. So we've done 5 day water fast, but we've built up to it. We don't just go jump into it. There are crutches though. There a pure water fast is the best, right? Meaning just water, nothing else. Water, maybe like some sea salt or unflavored electrolytes. That's the best option because you're going to get the most benefits. But then there are some crutches, right? Like fat, for example, like a tablespoon of coconut oil, a shot of olive oil. Fat doesn't raise glucose and insulin. You're getting some calories, but if you're dealing with some energy issues during a fast, if you're dealing with some hunger during a fast, having a shot of coconut oil could help. But yeah, I would build up, I would work my way up to it. If you've already done 24 hours, then go for a 32, 36-hour fast. If you've already done that, then you could work your way up to a 72-hour fast.
Love that. So good. Okay. I want to hear how that goes for our people.
Yes, keep us
Um,
posted.
yeah, for sure. All right, Ben, I have one final question before we get to go into the private Zoom room with my community, but is there anything else you want to mention before I ask you that last one?
Private Zoom room. That's awesome. No, I'm looking forward to that. No, I want to know what that last question is. Let's go.
Yeah. So for the woman or even the man listening who's, overwhelmed and maybe feeling a little bit stuck with their metabolism, whether it's like hormonally or stress or whatever, like what is the one thing that you hope they walk away from this conversation with?
Well, it's to understand that, to know, like deep down, that your metabolism, your body is not broken. It's just being interfered with. And as long as you identify the interference and remove that interference, your body will heal. Your metabolism will heal. Doesn't matter if you're on 25 medications. It doesn't matter if you're 75, 55, what your health history is, what your genetics look like, what your genes in the family look like. Identify the interference, remove it, the body will heal. So your body's not broken, it's just being interfered with. It's your job to remove that interference and your body will heal no matter what.
Beautiful. Love it. Love it. All right. I hope everybody enjoyed this conversation. I know you did. And thank you so much for being here, Ben.
Thank you, Melissa.
Wow, that was so good. I hope you guys are walking away not just with tips, but with trust. Trust in your body, trust in your rhythm, trust in your own voice. And what Ben reminded us of today is that freedom, whether it's metabolic freedom or your nervous system, doesn't come simply from doing more. It comes from listening, tuning in, working with your body, and making the small shifts that add up over time. If you have not yet read Metabolic Freedom, I highly recommend it. We just brought it into our book nook, and you can grab a copy for yourself today. And if something was sparked for you in this episode, come let me know, DM me, comment, hit that like button. Go ahead and share this episode with someone that you feel can benefit from it. And I'll see you next time. Thanks.